Hi, I'm Haarm-Pieter Duiker, consulting with Epic Games as a visual effects supervisor. My background is in film and games, and I'm really enjoying this moment of connecting real-time and film quality visual effects. I think one of the biggest challenges that you see in a visual effects pipeline, and people work on this consistently, is the sort of shortening the creative iteration loop. The more iterations you get on a given project, on a given shot, on a given animation, the better it's going to get, provided you're getting feedback and you're continuing to progress. And so people in the visual effects world will work on multi-threading their rigs, or interactive rendering, or highly cached comping. These are all approaches to working towards an interactive or real-time workflow. Working with a game engine, because the game engine by definition has to run real-time, you get that just as as a byproduct of the tool you're working with, and it's really transformative. So instead of struggling to get to an interactive space, you're working with a tool that's inherently interactive, and it really changes just the nature of production. Instead of hitting a button and waiting, hitting a button and waiting, you are now at the point of moving a slider and seeing the result instantaneously. And it not only affects how an individual artist works in just being more productive and getting more creative iterations in a day, but it also affects the way teams work, because there's now less of a need for a rigid hierarchical structure where it's one person's feedback and then the next person has to go and execute and come back the next day. It becomes much more straightforward to say, let's work on this particular aspect, and then you can go with the person, make the change, agree that it's done, and move on to the next thing. So I don't see this as a sort of a binary choice of working in film or in games. I think especially as you look at the advances that have come through in lots of game engines. I've been working with Unreal most recently, so I would obviously focus on that. But they all push towards a place where you can use a game engine to work on visual effects, to previs visual effects and film work. We saw a presentation earlier today from Rob Legato about Jungle Book, and they actively used a game engine integrated into Motion Builder to previs the lighting while they were doing their motion capture. And I think you'll see a lot more workflows in the visual effects and film world that are predicated on using game engines going forward. So I think I'll say first and foremost, I have not used a game engine directly on a film project. So just to sort of preface the statement, but what a game engine does, basically a game engine, or really any high quality real-time renderer, gives you is the ability to preview what you will see coming out of your final renderer. And the value of that is that you can make decisions on set that you wouldn't be able to make otherwise. So if the DP wants to see this motion capture, this capture data, but with backlighting or with some semblance of how they think they'll light the set eventually, they can now do that in a way that's actually much more predictive of what they'll get out of the final visual effects pipeline. And they can decide in context effectively whether or not that motion capture was good, whether or not the camera angle was right. So I'd say that the fundamental workflow is the same across, at least between, I can speak to Unreal specifically, and the graph editor in Maya or Softimage, or any of the traditional tools, Katana for instance. When you're creating a set of materials, it's fundamentally a node-based setup where you have a base material that you feed in, and textures that you can layer in arbitrary ways. So from a kind of workflow perspective, an artist transitioning from one place to the other really shouldn't have that much trouble. The individual nodes that you use may be slightly different, but the fundamental sort of practice is the same. In terms of when a film production would choose to use a digital element versus when a game engine would use that, or given a traditional offline rendering process versus a game engine, I don't think that actually changes how the visual effects of the film world would sort of approach that problem. There's a cost associated with going to a digital product and a traditional visual effects workflow that may be slightly reduced for you to use a game engine, but there are sort of additional costs connected with a game engine renderer right now, and that they don't typically provide as many passes, or there may be slight limitations in sort of the lighting or the kind of final finish that a visual effects pipeline knows how to address. So there's trade-offs in both in terms of final quality versus cost of production. So I think from a film production perspective, if the shot can't be shot because the camera move is impossible to do with a real camera, or the character's action can't be performed by a stuntman or the real person, then they'll go digital, and the choice of how you actually produce the digital element, whether it's visual effects or a game engine or a visual effects company using a game engine, won't really affect that decision that much. I think we're at a point where directors and productions in general can delay choices until the very last minute on many, many, many levels. And adding in visual effects or adding in sort of a digital process enables that even more. So to the extent that directors may not know exactly what they want out of a given piece of action, I think they're gonna go digital for those reasons. And whether or not that makes the movie better because they can keep iterating until they find the action that's perfect, or it makes it worse because they can delay deciding what they want, and when they would have had to give it direction in a more traditional context in the past. It's not for me to judge. I think we can probably both say that we've seen movies that feel like they may have been over iterated on in the digital process, and you've seen other movies that could not have been made traditionally, just would not have been possible, and are amazing for that. So yeah, there will be people who will sort of be firmly in one camp or the other, but I think if you find the right director who knows how to use the tools, you look at Avatar with James Cameron, you look at Jungle Book just came out, there are movies that would not be possible without visual effects as they are. It feels like there are, I think, as the sort of emphasis shifts from one-off tricks or impossible to achieve action, I think directors have started to open their sort of horizons or minds about where digital visual effects can come in. Right, it can be much more subtle, and you named off a great list of examples. Michael Douglas, thank you. I mean, that was a great use, and for most of the audience, completely seamless, right? And it's not flashy, it's not hugely in your face, but people definitely wonder, wait, how did that happen? And that's where they don't. They just enjoy the movie, which is sort of really the true testament to the visual effect, right? It should be seamless. I think we've seen the full range of humans turning into monsters, and I don't expect that to stop anytime soon. People love monsters, right? It's a fun part of going to the movies. So taking one person's motion and putting it onto another, anything from the classics sort of mocap case of the Andy Serkises of the world onto much more subtle transfer of motion. That's an area that I expect to see continuing. But it's nice that we've gotten to a point where people feel that they really can experiment with the results of producing a digital human, and knowing that you don't have to be faithful, you don't have to stick with the original inputs. It doesn't have to be the person that you captured that is shown on screen, and and that just really opens up a ton of possibilities.